even though it might, like, for someone listening to this or watching, it might be like, that sounds like it's just like uncomfortable and a lot of work. And it's like, yeah, it is. But hey, I'm Nick.
And I'm Graeme.
And this is the Dude, Where's My Code podcast. And this is season 2, episode 2. Graeme, you and I were just having a conversation about engineering teams working with product managers and those relationships. What were your thoughts on that conversation?
Yeah, just exploring some of the past experiences we've had, things that maybe worked well, maybe things that didn't work as well. And just exploring kind of the division of roles, responsibilities, and accountability, as well as just maybe like how to have a good working relationship with your product manager.
Yeah, and I think for me that was one of the really good takeaways to reflect on, was how to build that relationship, and some things that I'm going to take after, recording all of this and just try to focus on and make sure that I can improve that. So I think you guys are going to love it. Thanks so much for watching. Please like the video, leave us a comment, and subscribe, and have a listen. See you next time. Okay, so for us, we just started, I want to say we just wrapped up planning. Planning for us is a really long process, and I don't want to say we just wrapped it up because it's the new year, and technically we were wrapped up before the new year started. But we do in our org, we do like semester planning, which is 6 months at a time. So it's a lot of planning that goes in. And Graeme, I think I've mentioned to you before that, at least on my team, and I think this is probably the same for a bunch of teams in my org, because we have to roll changes out like to a ton of machines in the data centers, and we purposefully do things at we have like safe rollout practices and stuff like that are deemed by time and bake time. A lot of stuff just takes longer. Like, could we go faster? Absolutely, but it's kind of mandated that we go slower in a lot of cases. So on my team, stuff just takes longer to get done. So it's not because we do too much at once and therefore we can't get it done. It's just because like the amount of work in parallel is significant. And I feel like when it comes to planning, like in my opinion, like unfortunately it carries over into that as well, because I would love to do planning for way smaller periods of time than like 6 months. Like, every time we plan, I'm like, all that I know is we're not doing this stuff. Like, I know that's going to change. The first few weeks or something might be like, okay, those are our priorities, but I can guarantee, like, I would bet all of the money that I earn in a year that the next semester, like, we're not doing the things that we said, because it inevitably will change. Like, a lot of them, or maybe the spirit of them, will try to capture, but anyway, my point is that we just kind of kicked off the new year, which means we have a new semester that we're kind of getting into work. So, yeah, for us, it was kind of this interesting experience where we had our product team coming together with our engineering team, and we had a reorg at the beginning of last year. So it's kind of new. I mean, it's a full year, but still, I would say for an organization, it's still relatively new for us to have like this product and engineering interaction. So that's kind of our setup, where we have an entire product organization that is supporting us on the engineering side in our organization. So they support our team, which is technically 2 teams under one umbrella, plus one more like sister team. And what's kind of like your setup? Because I know, like, obviously we're dealing with significantly different scales and ages of companies and stuff. What's your kind of setup look like?
Well, and like, let me ask you before
Sure, yeah.
before I share. Where do the product and engineering orgs ultimately meet in terms of reporting structure? Like, are they separate entities until you get up to like top leadership level?
Yes, which is it's now that you asked that, I'm like, I don't know. So I can give you a bit of an overview from where I'm at right now. Like, I have my direct manager, and then a skip, and then another skip, and then our like CVP. And I know, and like that would be like, senior leadership for me at that CVP level. So she has like a partner that is on the product management side of things.
Okay.
So already at her level, and I don't know if they might have the same boss. So it might be like basically a couple of down from the CEO have the same boss at that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, it's always interesting to see how close or not product and engineering teams are. I've seen it structured in so many ways. It's
Yeah.
as with many things, pros and cons, and what problems you want to solve. I guess. Well, we're a
Right.
small org. We recently hired a senior product manager to make our product team a group of two. So
Okay.
we have our director of product who was kind of doing all the product responsibilities until recently, and now we've added a senior product manager. And so the way that division is currently working, again, they're supporting a small engineering org, so it's not like they need to really carve things into too many domains. So it's like right now we're doing a web migration, which is like a very specific initiative for 3 months, and so the new product manager is managing that project or initiative,
Sure.
and the other is looking more strategically at future work and trying to kind of figure out what problems we want to tackle and how we'll go about tackling them. So like more of the strategy level and less of the like tactical like user story level.
Okay.
And then they'll kind of do domain carving. So our senior product manager is focused on making sure we build the right stuff in the web app right now. And when it comes to maybe the mobile experience or some of the stuff that we don't do today that we would like to add on in the future, that's where the other person will be. So right now it's engineering is really only interacting with one
Okay.
for the most part, but there's a probable future not too far from now where, because we have two sub teams in engineering, depending on what initiative your team is working on, you may be interacting with one or the other product
Okay.
folks.
Interesting. Would you say in your setup then, I like kind of navigating this when I think about product management, right? It comes, I think we say PM a lot. It comes in a lot of different flavors. I know we were chatting before about like product manager, project manager. There's program manager. There's a lot of PM acronyms that come
Right.
out of similar but also dissimilar roles. But one thing that I like to kind of bring up and see how it fits in is the product owner type of role. And I find with product owner, it's less about like you don't, and maybe some places do, but I don't really think it's something you hire a product owner. It's just like a set of responsibilities that get associated either with a particular title, role, or position, and can potentially be shared. So, um, with respect to a product owner, maybe for viewers and listeners, when I'm saying product owner, this is, and Graham, if you have a different definition of this, it might be interesting to hear, but the set of responsibilities that go into a product owner are like ultimately calling the shots about like what things get delivered to be, like what type of value you're delivering to customers, the priority of that, sort of like urgency, severity. I think about them like as the ultimate user proxy, and they can be like a tiebreaker on, if you have different sets of input coming in to help shape the product. Ultimately, they're the ones that say like, put my hand up. I'm the product owner, and like I will kind of call the shot here. It sounds a little bit of like maybe it's authoritative, but it's not quite as rigid as it sounds when I describe it.
That's interesting. I haven't seen use of product owner as much as maybe I used to in the
Okay.
earlier days of people trying to do agile transitions. My perception was always that if you had product owner as a title, you reported into product managers. And so now I'm thinking, if the product owner is the like ultimate say on a specific product, is the product manager because they're managing that across multiple portfolios? Is it? Uh, I guess it. I don't know. Maybe that's why I see less like product owner
Oh,
title
sure.
anymore, right? Because maybe it's a little bit redundant. I don't actually know.
Well, and yeah, I think that's kind of been, I think when I was trying to explain it there, I think my stance is that the title of product owner is less of a formal title and more of like a set of responsibilities. So maybe I'll kind of frame up like two different examples that I've seen in some of my like more recent professional career. So, prior to being at Microsoft, we would have, say, product owners, and like at Magnet Forensics, our product owners would be the product managers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, depending on the team and stuff, like I know I had dedicated product managers that weren't embedded in the team, but a lot of the time they were either helping on like one product area or project area, or responsible for a couple, but they were your like go-to person. They would work with the team on setting the priorities, the user stories, and ultimately have, like I kind of said, having this job of being the user proxy. So in fact, a lot of them had the opportunity to go talk to customers. They would be going out and like, conducting interviews of different sorts, talking to forensic examiners, investigators, and just getting insights. But we could turn to them and we had like this relationship where we knew that like we could trust them with the questions we have, and they could give us answers that were, reflecting what users ideally would want. But that was the product manager having the product owner role.
Right.
And in my job currently at Microsoft, we're like I manage two platform teams, like they're deployment teams, so same thing. But the difference that I have seen up until this reorg, which is why it's like an interesting thing for me to navigate, but the we didn't have product managers that were dedicated to the team. And in fact, the only sort of PM role that we had were a couple of support. I'm calling them support. Like it's maybe sounds like a bad way to frame it, but they were acting as project managers, helping the team out. The product ownership responsibility came to the engineering managers. We
Mm-hmm.
would work with the tech leads and hear different inputs from the rest of our organization, different efforts going on, and schedule and strategize about the platform, and ultimately own the air quotes the product that we have, without having a dedicated separate role for doing that. So that's I'm just kind of painting the landscape of these two different types of scenarios I've seen. But does that, from your perspective, help kind of elaborate on how I see like a product ownership
Yeah. No,
responsibility?
definitely, for sure. It's interesting that you use the platform example. Of the platform teams that I've been a part of, we have never had dedicated product management for what the platform teams are delivering, even though they are
Right.
delivering a product to be consumed internally, like DevX or whatever.
Right.
Um, it was always the engineering manager, which in most of my experiences was me, and so uh, I guess perhaps it was easier because we were so close to the users. The users were the people sitting in the desks to my left and my right, and we are in the
Right.
same engineering management meetings, and we can ask what problems their teams are having. I get it, but it is interesting that um, product management was still seen as necessary, but not necessary enough to have someone who is dedicated to that skill set and that kind of knowledge, and applying it in that space.
So in your experience, I guess, on platform teams where you were the engineering manager, did you interface with product managers that weren't like owning the product the way that I explained? And if so, like what did that relationship look like with those?
I don't I don't think that I did
Okay.
in many of these experiences. It was the closest thing I can think of is in large enough organizations where we had someone who was wearing a project management hat.
Sure.
right? And that is hey, we had a whole at Autodesk we had a whole process built around when we did planning, which I in a lightweight version, and then more seriously kind of at the 6 month planning level. And it was pitch your initiatives
Right.
for the time frame. Once they get approved by leadership, we put them all together. We break down estimates and dependencies, and we put them in a giant Gantt chart. And then we kind of have weekly status meetings to hold the teams accountable for delivering at some cadence that's close to what they were trying to deliver
So
against.
that was very, like, would you say very bottom up in terms of like, tech leads, engineers on the teams are coming up with like primarily the ideas, the optimizations, the features, and then kind of internally like vetting them on smaller scale and kind of bubbling that up?
Yeah, 100%.
Very cool. Okay. That's a that experience aligns very much like when I started at Microsoft. I mean, that's what was happening because I was mentioning the PM role that was interacting with us. Like again, they were there to, especially during planning, to just like facilitate that we were planning. But I felt like everything came bottom up, um, unless they were aware, because they did a lot of like with Microsoft being ridiculously big. Um, there's so many teams that like almost once a week I hear about a new team or something, and it's can be impossible to like have full spectrum view of everything going on, especially for planning. So the PM role in that scenario was super valuable for just bringing in context or collaborating between teams, being like, hey, from these other discussions I've been part of, I've heard of these other teams. They have this initiative coming up. We should sync with them. So they were super helpful at helping us just have connections in places that I felt like otherwise we were missing. But between that and having also some top down visibility, because sometimes some top down initiatives that were pretty big coming from, like executive level, they like we might not have as clear visibility into that, but the PM role would bring that into us. So they help balance it out, but like honestly, it felt like 90% was kind of just bottom up, and we would run with that. So that's interesting.
Yeah, parallel experiences kind of seems like there's a natural tendency, like one way or another.
Yeah, and I guess part of me, like as we talk through this, part of me is curious if like that was a lot to do with the fact that they are platform teams specifically. Um, I know I'm trying to think of like, working on, you know, end user software and offerings like that, right? Where the people are, I mean, you could argue at large companies too that when you're having platforms, the end users within the company, you're far enough separated anyway that it's, the exact same thing. But I still think about end users at Microsoft. Like I have my partners and then like literally end users that are people are outside of Microsoft. But um, at Magnet when we were building things, it's like I guess the difference for me is I don't have the luxury of like calling up an investigator, an examiner, and being like, hey man, like tell me about how you want to use this. Whereas internally at Microsoft, if someone is like, hey, I have feedback about the deployment process or it's not working, like I have that direct contact. It doesn't matter what team they're on. Like we have a direct contact. So I just wonder if, as we're kind of exploring this, if those types of interactions, being able to have them internally, changes some of the dynamic about you know uh, the necessity of like a PM role.
I still think those tasked with figuring out what to build and how to solve a problem will have to learn and navigate skills that would make a PM or product manager,
Absolutely.
because you're going to fall prey to loudest voice in the room wins. If you don't have techniques to figure out how to source like feedback and prioritization and understanding like the impact of the changes, you're just going to have people yelling about their problems, and whoever's the most annoying might convince you to build a solution for them. And so I think
That's
there
a
is
that's a good point.
there's elements there, whether you know you're doing them or not, whether you're doing them well or not, is um, maybe up for debate. But I think there are elements of where do we get this data from? How do we put weight to what we're hearing? How do we couple that to the organization's priorities and what the org or the group is trying to accomplish and where they've set their goals, and how to what we're proposing to build support those as well. So there is techniques in there, but I do think maybe the sheer size of people you're building for, the gap between the builders and the users, from platform teams to product teams, like I think those things probably reduce the need for a dedicated role or someone who is more skilled in some of those techniques. You can kind of get away with an engineering manager who isn't as good at it. At least that's how I feel about when I've been in that position.
Right.
I certainly, we had a team retro today, and one of the things was how the user stories were not particularly clear, so the team struggled a bit with ambiguity. And it's because, guess
Right.
what, I was writing the tickets because our PM was sick, and so one of the takeaways was Graeme should not be the product manager, because that's not where my dedication and kind of ultimate skills lie.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's why we have product managers. But when I was on a platform team, I was able to get away with that, and we would apply different techniques and attempts at it. But I think where the impact is far greater when you don't build the right thing for customers who are paying you money or customers who are kind of your end user, versus if you build the wrong thing internally, you're gonna know, you're gonna hear about it.
Yeah. That's I think something I want to maybe drill into a little bit more, because I really liked how you framed it, but this idea that you don't want to fall prey to the loudest voice in the room, right? So I feel like the superpower of a good product manager is that they can really navigate that, because they're representing the user, right? They're able to kind of take either the noise from the users and distill it and make sense of it and try to navigate and come up with what's best. Or if it's internal, again, same thing. But um, yeah, I feel like that's a superpower of a good product manager. But I started to think too, if we're talking about some of these bottom up approaches, I mean, I've seen instances with less experienced product managers, and no fault of theirs. Like, I'm not trying to bash them or anything, but I've seen situations where they kind of just get steamrolled, where literally the loudest voice in the room, if it's someone, it could be, we've talked about intelligent jerks and stuff before in season one of our podcast, where
Right.
someone might just be, stubborn about something, they're loud about it, and ultimately it's well, that person's making the most noise for the PM that might be less experienced, or that's my biggest pain is this person who's making noise about it. They're making more noise than I'm in tune with the customers to hear making noise, so therefore I will go schedule this work. And
Right.
I mean, again, I'm not trying to say they will be bad product managers forever kind of thing, but to me it's a sign that they're inexperienced because they're unable to balance that appropriately. But I just wanted to kind of maybe bring it back to that point, because I thought it was super interesting to kind of talk about that, that being a core thing they do. In your opinion, is that the center of their role that you see as value, or do you see it maybe spread across different things? Or
Great question. I think there's a sliding scale of product manager involvement, and
okay,
sometimes that comes from the organization's expectation of the role, and sometimes it just comes from the relationship that gets built between an engineering manager and a product manager. I think for me, it really comes down to the being able to focus responsibilities. And
right,
so part of the reason I joked about, Graeme shouldn't be a product manager isn't necessarily because I couldn't do it, but I couldn't do it while also fulfilling all of my engineering responsibilities. couldn't do both well, I don't think. Even
Mm,
with as small of an engineering team as I have,
sure.
it's too much. And so where I think product managers can really apply, the best skills is that, okay, what's the problem? Let's
Right.
understand the problem. And then of course, like the most skilled ones know how to go and talk through that problem with users without letting the conversation stray too far into what would you like us to build you. It's a
Right.
very big uh, mistake, easy mistake to make, which is just tell me what you want. And product managers hopefully have the space to go and explore. If people are talking about what they want, let's go figure out why. What are they working around that we don't provide them today? Or why do they think it needs to operate that way? And then kind of solicit that from the right sampling of users or stakeholders. And then also being able to connect that with actual data and evidence.
Sure.
And sometimes that's where there is a good overlap with engineering. It often requires us to build the right tooling in place to be able to capture the right metrics to monitor behaviors of users and use that as an input for uh, the size of the problem or the impact of the problem. And then distilling all of that into an idea about what the solution looks like
Okay.
from a real systems perspective. Like, what would a flow or an experience look like? And organizations that are big enough to have a dedicated user experience team will do this as well and work very closely with product on, let's understand the right experience is the best word I can think of,
Sure.
and then come back to engineering and say, this is the experience we want to build. Let's talk about how we go about doing that. And
Right.
through that, we then can arrive at a breakdown of user stories that are step-by-step instructions for, hey, we want to deliver this specific implementation to solve this problem, and provide all of that context. And I think that piece is crucial for product managers to also have the skill of like advocacy and context sharing, because
Ah,
it's easy for a product manager to go to a team and say, listen, I'm in the product role, or I'm the product owner, so I have final say about what gets built because the organization says I do, so build this thing. And you get back into that situation of engineering effectively feeling like they're just delivering a shopping list for a product owner or
sure.
product manager.
Yeah.
And what they should really be able to do is come and compel the teams that are building the solutions to understand why this problem is a problem, why it's worthy of solving, and then get them on board with coming up with the solution that best serves the users.
Well, I'm glad you brought that part up because something that, as you were chatting, I was like, I'm thinking about this and like, I want to find a good spot to bring this up because I, I often think about this when I think about my interactions with product that have been really good, and it's gonna sound kind of funny, but I like going into conversations with product managers and building relationships with them where I can essentially be like, again, I might not have the right words to frame this properly and accurately, but like I want to be like almost it's gonna like I'm against them, right? Like, and hear me out for a sec because I want them to like you said it really well. I want them to compel us that this is the thing. Like we should be building this. Here's why. Here's the evidence. And I want to be able to have them tell me all of this stuff that's so good and awesome. And I need to be in a position where I can say, okay, like I need to be able to make sure that I can get this work assigned, work with the engineers to see what's feasible. And I use the word against. I don't really mean like I'm just going to tell them no on everything because I want to get awesome stuff done too. But I need to be able to go back because a lot of the time, I don't think I've ever seen a product manager come in with less scope. It's always some amount that's too much because there's so many great things to go build. So I need, when I say against, I'm really trying to say like, I need to go back to them and say like, here's our view of deliverables and implementations and like the technical side to go back it up. And then they go, okay, that's nice, but like, this is really important. What if we change this? And having this back and forth where we can have like really difficult, challenging conversations. Sometimes they're heated and passionate, right? Because it's like, no, this is so important for the customer. And I'm going, yeah, but our technology is so far off from being able to do that. We need more time. Like all of these things coming together. And personally, even though it might like for someone listening to this or watching, it might be like, that sounds like it's just like uncomfortable and a lot of work. And it's like, yeah, it is. But the reality is when you have these really good relationships with engineering and product, I feel like it feels good to have those conversations. You go in and it's like it's difficult and then you leave and both sides are like, hell yeah, we did that. Like it just feels good to get it done. But that's been my experience, I think, when I've had really good like PM alignment. And it kind of comes back to that like healthy friction, maybe I can call it that, healthy friction between the two. What are your thoughts on like what you would consider like a really good engineering and PM like relationship?
It's been best described to me as a healthy tension between the two
Oh, that's
roles.
good. That's
So
good.
you're right there,
Okay.
and that's I think that is what it is because you mentioned earlier, a potential um, trait of a product manager that may not be as successful would be not having a strong foundation or grounding in their beliefs and getting steamrolled, and you won't have a healthy tension if you go into a meeting and you say like, no, we're not going to build that, and they say okay.
Yeah,
Like
it's
no
zero
problem.
tension, right? Like,
It's
and
great.
zero tension both ways is awful. Like, to an engineering team to have a PM that just says yes to everything, you might feel like, hell yeah, like we can just, refactor code for the rest of eternity and not ever ship anything real again.
Yeah.
And the other way around, if an engineering team's always saying yes to a PM, like honestly, they're just going to be disappointed like every single time they're waiting for things to get delivered. So I think yeah, you need that tension. Tension's a good word.
It sets an expectation too, which I think is really cool. So I think a lot about the engineering manager representing the engineering group, and when we're talking about prioritization of work and scheduling of work, we want to figure out how to put technical improvements and technical initiatives and tackling
Right.
tech debt in there. And so if we set the expectation that product is going to come armed with the evidence that they need to make a compelling argument for the priorities that they want to tackle, to have that tension, it's also the expectation that we will meet that bar when bringing hey, we need to advocate for some space for some tech debt or some maintenance work or some technical improvements. And so we can now we're like no side is like outgunned, like you said about
Yeah.
right. It's you're coming in and saying, well, here's what I want, and here's like my evidence, and here's what I want, and here's my evidence, and from that you can have a really good negotiation and discussion.
I like that framing. I'm gonna bring up one point on that, and I think maybe one more thing to that we can kind of jump into right after that is like we kind of touched on it a little bit when we were giving lay of the land, but like product managers on islands versus embedded in teams. I want to touch on that briefly right after this, but I don't want to go on too much of a soapbox here. But I've been active on LinkedIn and I've been talking about tech debt and refactoring code and stuff a lot. I just wanted to mention that like the and you made such a good point about like the engineering side needs to be able to come forward just like a product manager or product owner would with the features and the things they want customers to have, right? The product side is like empowered to be responsible for sharing that, giving the evidence, and I would say entirely on the engineering side, you want tech debt addressed, come with good arguments about it. And it's not enough, in my opinion, it's not enough to say, well, that's the legacy code. It's old. It's written like crap. There's no tests because the users don't care. The users don't care at all. If it seems to be working, great. So it becomes like you have to think about how to articulate this clearly to the product side. Because if you're like, well, we want to go refactor it so we can write the tests on it, They might go, I don't care. The user doesn't care. But if you say, hey, product owner or product manager, all of that work coming up in this next period that you want us to go tackle, all of it is in that legacy code base. There are no tests. It is completely brittle. Every time we touch it in the last 5 years, the 3 times we've had crazy incidents, we need to spend time refactoring it so that we can go land these things on schedule comfortably and not have tons of users making noise. Suddenly, that starts to become a little bit more of a better argument for getting that tech debt scheduled. So I just wanted to mention that I think that engineering really needs to be able to represent that. As much as people love to talk about like this boy scouting stuff, like I think yes, try to keep incrementally refactoring things, but I've absolutely seen times where boy scouting goes off the rails and teams are blocked for months, literally months, because someone boy scouted a little bit too hard. So I think it's important to get that scheduled accordingly.
Yeah, this is probably like a little bit bold and lacks some nuance that it should have. But if you
Sure.
can't articulate the benefit to the users of doing tackling technical debt or refactors, it's probably not worth doing at all. And like I love that you said like they don't care, and they really don't, and product doesn't either and shouldn't. And if you're just if you can't articulate that, then you're just doing engineering busy work for the sake of doing work. And maybe it's enjoyable for you, and maybe it does have a positive outcome in that the code is cleaner or more maintainable. But if nobody asked for that, it's just not I don't understand how it could be advocated for as a priority. And so teams do have to get better at being able to articulate what's the product value of this work that we're going to do. And like you said, it can be, oh, it'll reduce our incident rate, and that's something we can track and measure and make sure it does.
Because that's something we happen to care about, right? For our users, the business.
Yeah, it might net improve like speed of feature delivery. Say, hey, if we could allocate 2 focused weeks to like refactoring this feature, then every time we know you have a bunch of investments you want made there and improvements made there, we can make those so much faster. But if we don't do this refactor, then every single person who goes in there is going to experience pain and flaky tests and whatever it is. And the ultimate, speed to delivery gets longer and longer and longer.
Right. The
That's fine.
confidence level too is dropped dramatically, right? If you're like, even if you can't guarantee a speed improvement, you're like, we just have low confidence that any estimate or whatever we tell you in
Mm-hmm.
this is going to be reasonable. So,
Yeah,
um,
predictability is huge. I also think there is not to be ignored a factor of developer happiness.
sure.
I think like going into this, like no one wants to go into this legacy code base and it sucks and we avoid it at all costs, and people are bummed when they pick up a task that ultimately has to do that. That is worth noting. But I also think that if there's a risk of developer happiness in a specific piece of the code base, there is probably also an end user impact that just hasn't been identified in terms of number of incidents or time to delivery.
Right.
And you could probably suss that out with a little bit more effort.
Yeah, I like on the dev happiness part. Thank you for bringing that up because I always feel like I take such a strong. It seems like I take a strong stance against like just doing tech debt. It's like no, I just make the value apparent. On the dev happiness part, I like to think about that as an engineering manager. I want to keep my team engaged. You tell me about the happiness level. I want to make sure that you are happy and engaged. The product side is not going to care about that. So if I know that that's in the cards and that's going to help you, excellent. Thank you for letting me know. I will try to make sure that I can represent you in those conversations as well. But ultimately, I want to make sure as an engineering manager, the highest priority tech debt that my team's identifying is getting airtime. And I need to make sure I'm working with them to understand truly what the business impact is going to be. So
Yeah.
I didn't want to go off the rails too much on that. I just thought it was important when we're talking about this healthy tension. But okay, islands of product managers embedded in teams. What have you seen work? What have you seen either not work? What are your thoughts on how that's organized?
It probably varies from org to org based on culture and what your product
Okay.
culture is. I think for me, like what I've seen uh, most successful, I think, is I don't know. I don't know if I have a strong opinion about it when I really sit and think about it.
Right?
Like
Yeah, it's
it it may not matter as much as like are we all aligned at what we're trying to accomplish? And I
you
think
got it. Yeah.
it right if somehow actually I have experienced this. I won't be able to think of a specific example, I'm sure. But at one of the previous orgs I was at, product and engineering ended up with different OKRs.
Okay.
Now, they are all supposed to roll up to the org level objectives and key results that we're all trying to achieve, but they took different paths. And with each of them having OKRs, we did end up with this strange dynamic where, let's say, I don't remember exactly, but let's say some of engineering's OKRs were specifically around improving the stability of the platform.
Sure.
And like the product group's OKRs were around making sure we delivered a certain number of new monetizable features. And
Sure.
there and that tension got kind of beyond healthy and to boiling points when product is saying we're measured on these outcomes and so we can't flex on that, this is what needs to be built, and engineering is saying no, we have this super problem with stability and we're being measured on the platform's ability to stabilize, so we need that work to happen. And like that's where that's difficult. And so whether the product group has their own leader and the engineering group has their own leader and you've got a chief technical officer and a chief product officer, like it comes down to wherever that connection, that roll up or that bridge is, are they
Right.
making sure that everyone's marching in the same direction? And then whether product is on an island or product managers feel much closer to the individual teams that they work with, I don't know if that's the success criteria as much as the goal setting.
I like that. I as you started talking or like thinking through it in the beginning, you're like, I don't really know. Uh, I think right before you said it out loud, I was like, I want to mention something about alignment, and the reason it clicked for me is because almost every time we talk about stuff in engineering management, leadership, all these different things, it's like so often it comes back to like alignment and expectations. Like always, we've talked about how do you talk with your manager? How do you, inform relationships and stuff? And it's like it's always coming back to expectations. And the I feel that you kind of made a point, right? It could vary a lot depending on the organization and a lot of different factors. So I feel that the implementation of how it's done could lend itself well or maybe less ideally to being able to have aligned expectations and working together, but it doesn't mean that one way or the other it's impossible. And I think that if you are able to get those aligned expectations, then the implementation might just be something you optimize. So the example I mentioned with Magnet, right? Like they had we had our product managers, they're not on our team, right? They don't sit in like the set of cubes with us on the team. They literally sit in a different portion of the entire building,
Mm-hmm.
like separate from the engineers, but it didn't matter. Like they had their own reporting structure. They would come over and work with us and um did they need to be like directly involved with us that much? Maybe, maybe not, but I think they were using that to facilitate this aligned set of expectations so that we could just work closely with them. So if they were embedded directly or operating on an island, I think that you just have to find different ways to get that sort of healthy relationship built.
I wonder if the embedded model comes from the like pure agile, like teams should be made up of like these types of roles.
Yeah,
But something I know we've experienced when you try to have these kind of like embedded, like cross-functional teams, is like the leadership and like the dotted line reporting structure start to fall apart really quickly. And
Yeah.
so, right, like how as an engineering manager, like I'm in no position to be managing product managers. And realistically, if you want that healthy tension, there has to be some degree of separation with different like mandates, I guess, as long as kind of the outcomes we're trying to accomplish are the same.
Yeah, it's a really interesting challenge. I think the idea of having different roles embedded in teams, I really like because it brings me back to thinking about a team being totally autonomous. Like you have everything you need all in one spot,
Hmm.
get the work done. That feels really good. But what's interesting is that again, if the a particular role is not embedded, as long as their other responsibilities outside of your team don't block you, then I feel like you still get the same benefits. So at least in my cases where again, healthy, super healthy relationships with PMs that had other teams they were supporting, it's because we never felt like, oh, we can't get a hold of our PM or like, oh, this isn't working because we've been forgotten about. It's like, no, we have the connection we need. So um the other part you mentioned too was like the reporting structure. Certainly I think the more people have experience in management and leadership, you kind of see this, right? It's not impossible to be a manager of different roles. I think that management in general comes down to like there's a lot of people skills and career development, but it becomes harder to do career development and to I feel like to offer a lot of specific benefits to team members when you don't have the background to kind of back that up. Like, can you coach them still? Can you put them in the right direction? Absolutely, I think so. I feel like for me, one of my superpowers, if I can call it that, as an engineering manager, is that I have a technical background programming and doing software development hands on. So I can, ideally, I like to think that I can relate to the engineers that I'm leading. If I had other types of roles, could I still coach and help? I think so, but it becomes less relatable and I'm able to lean into that less. So I can see that being challenging.
Yeah. Now something, probably with only a few minutes left, I think you talked about alignment of expectations and many things being more about a communication problem or challenge to be solved than anything else. I think one of the things I think is probably constantly evolving, unless some teams have figured out how to nail it, is where are all of those channels of alignment and communication that can take place between engineering and product?
Right.
I've seen some teams where it works well for product to pitch and compel to the engineering team and then say, great, go forth and solve the problem, build this and give me and let's see what happens. And where I've seen other teams say like, no, I want to be involved in writing all the specific user stories. I want PM demos when a developer has completed kind of their user story. Like I want to see and I want to like physically vet it against the requirements before we consider it done or even like moving into testing potentially. And so there's all these different ways that different uh, experiences might shape how somebody wants to work, both on the engineering side and the product side.
Right.
And I think where there's constant work to be done in that relationship is figuring out like how do you get the information you need and how do I get the information I need, but we do that in a way where we're like kind of staying out of each other's way enough but making sure that the right decisions can be made at the right time. And I think building and evolving those processes takes effort for that to
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. And I think that's a good, like, I'm trying to think about my takeaways from this chat, right? And I think your final sort of summary there for me is really like this reminder, like, after this conversation, maybe audit is too strong of a word, but a reflection, like where can we be improving that? Where are there are these opportunities where we can kind of bolster that communication or the transparency, the getting the right people, getting people the things that they're interested in seeing, like their stakeholders, what do they need to do their job effectively? and what do we need from them to do our job effectively? So I think that's a takeaway from me that I'm gonna try to give some thought to after this.
Nice. Yeah. We're in the middle of evolving our engineering product interactions, and they're in their infancy. And of course, we run into some of these challenges, but we also have a really high level of trust and alignment in the organization. And so I know that when we're asking for things and pushing back on each other what we can and can't do, it's because we're all trying to make sure we build the right things in the right way as quickly as possible. So yeah,
Awesome. Well, that's great. It'll be interesting to see over time as you guys are evolving, like how that shapes up. So that's awesome. So Graeme, thanks so much for the chat. As always, it's always insightful. I learn something new every time. So thank you very much. And yeah, I just wanted to say for folks listening and watching, if you want to do us a favor, like the video, subscribe, leave us a comment if you have other topics you want to hear about, or if you have thoughts on what we discussed today, and either aligning opinions or completely different perspectives, we'd love to hear and get back to you on that.
absolutely.
All right, Graeme. Well, take care, and we will see you next time.